welcome back to the Editorial, the semi-regular podcast where we discuss the mistakes we make in videos and why people hate us. As always, I'm joined by Zach Michaelis.
Hello.
And as a special debut guest, we have Rory.
Hello.
Rory.
Welcome to the
Hopefully
Editorial.
my last time on
Doesn't
the
get a
Editorial.
surname?
Rory Taylor.
Yes,
Sorry, Rory.
that's all right.
You're
It's
on
okay.
the second time. We'll add names. Eventually
Yeah.
we'll get to your middle name and stuff. I mean, Zach's probably got enough, considering.
Very cheap.
Okay, so let's get into it. Rory is here to discuss a couple of global videos because Rory works a fair bit on the Glboal channel. But before we get to that, should we cap off the other channels too?
Yeah, I
first?
think so.
We've got some small things on EU and UK that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
What's been happening? What have we done that is controversial?
So I think just a little recap for listeners. The thing we do here is we basically go through all the videos that we've done since we did our last editorial, and any that have like significantly lower than average like-dislike ratios. We just have a look through, see what sort of mistakes we made, and actually any ones where we just made a mistake anyway.
Yeah.
And then discuss them and sometimes apologise for them here. And so the last time we did an editorial was July 14th, which isn't great form from us because we promised to do them every 2
Bi-weekly,
weeks.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's at least 4 weeks. But I was on holiday and chaos. And let's start with EU. So on EU, there basically been 3 videos since we did the last editorial that I think we have like something to talk about, as it were.
Okay.
Now, the first one is going to be why Poland has a surprisingly liberal immigration policy, which was released on July 17th. And that has a like-dislike ratio of 95.5, which, for context, is it's maybe 2% lower than usual. We're normally about 97.5. I think people took issue with the idea that there was anything surprising about Poland's relatively liberal immigration policy, because they basically said that there's nothing inconsistent with the fact that Poland's government dislikes illegal immigration but likes legal immigration.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
And the surprising thing isn't actually to do with illegal immigration, really.
Yeah,
it's to do with legal immigration. So the argument is that isn't surprising.
They were just sort of parroting what the Polish government says every time, which is that we only dislike illegal immigration. Okay. You see something similar in the UK, which is when the Tories are challenged on it, they say we only dislike illegal immigration.
They should come through legitimate routes. These are illegal immigrants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is technically true, but obviously there is usually some correlation between these two things. Generally, governments that focus more and are more keenly opposed to illegal immigration, in inverted commas, normally have more restrictive legal immigration policies.
Sure.
This is also in some part a symptom of the fact there isn't actually as clean a distinction between legal and illegal immigration as lots of governments like to pretend.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Polish case, for example, the Polish government has pushed back against the EU's new refugee scheme. Obviously, that is the legality of that confusing because it depends how you interpret international law and all those various post-World War II immigration conventions. But also, that's legally mandated by the EU. So it might collide with domestic Polish law, but the point there is that the whole illegal distinction is getting fuzzy already.
Okay.
And something similar is true in the UK, for example, because obviously this whole thing about who's a legitimate asylum seeker and this distinction between asylum seekers and economic migrants is a bit fuzzy.
Yeah.
But so that was the first thing to say there, is that there's normally a correlation, so it does feel a little bit odd. But the other thing is that the policy is definitely in tension with the Law and Justice Party's rhetoric on the issue. So they talk a lot about the threat of Muslim immigration and sort of Poland's identity as a Christian nation. But then they are pushing very actively in terms of where they're giving out their visas to get immigrants in from Muslim majority countries, like Turkey, for example.
Okay.
And again, that there is definitely a tension there. So I don't really think we have all that much to apologise here for. I think in some part, it's a symptom of the fact that it's only 8 minutes, so you couldn't dive deep into the whole legal-illegal distinction. But that's why people got grumpy. Okay. And I'm just basically going to say that they were wrong, which is, there you go.
That is surprising.
Well, yeah, normally we do a lot of apologising on that, but I don't think we have anything to apologise for there.
Yeah, okay.
Then the next one is how Meloni became the most popular EU leader, which was released on July 31st, which has, give me 1 second, has a like-dislike of 96.5, which isn't that low,
not
but
that bad.
The main thing here was that people pushed back against the idea that Giuseppe Conte was a technocrat, which is what we said he was.
Okay.
This is sort of fair enough, to be honest, because Giuseppe Conte was a technocrat when he became prime minister, but he sort of became a politician, as it were. And we didn't make that clear enough in the video.
That's fair enough.
So like, I think we should have, apologise for that. That was our bad. It was a bit
slightly
quick.
misleading.
Yeah, slightly misleading. And then the last one on EU is could Wagner occupy the Suwalki gap, which was released on August 4th. And that has a like-dislike ratio of 96.2. The first mistake we made here is that you said Balkans instead of Baltics.
Classic. Apologies. That's on me.
That's clearly on us.
Unless the script was wrong. But
No,
I imagine
it was
me.
you. Yeah.
You changed it retroactively. I should lock down the scripts as soon as I record them.
This is going to become such a catty
I'm
podcast.
checking the teleprompter.
It's just us roasting each other. But the other thing is that, and this is my bad, so we're definitely evens on this, and I definitely made a bigger boo-boo than you did, which is that when we basically in the video, we say that Russians have visa-free access to the Suwalki Gap, which isn't really true. Like what they actually have is visa-free access to take a train from Belarus to Kaliningrad.
Yeah.
And that like doesn't say anything about like the territory that is the Suwalki Gap. They're allowed to take a train which actually runs north of Suwalki Gap back down into Kaliningrad. And so actually the whole like ambiguity as to whether or not Wagner could occupy that doesn't really exist.
Okay.
Because the visa-free thing doesn't mean that Russians can be on the Suwalki Gap. It means they can take a train around it. So that was my bad. And that is sort of like, that's very important to the content of the video. And so that I have to apologize for that. Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, Rory, it's taken a little bit longer than I would hope, but
it's interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you listened to the editorial before, or is this your first?
I've listened every episode.
Okay,
I think.
great.
Yeah.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. Die-hard fan, one of the few. So on UK, again, only 3 videos here. The first is Rishi Sunak, the most right-wing prime minister since Thatcher.
Yes.
Which was released on August 4th and has a like-dislike of 95.4. I think it's quite hard to say precisely what people didn't like about this video. I think some viewers thought we understated how right-wing Sunak was.
Okay.
And I think other viewers disagreed with our use of certain labels. It was quite like a policy, what's the right word? It's quite like like political theory heavy video.
Okay.
So we were using terms like libertarian and like terms like right wing when they're used in that many contexts can be controversial. So
yeah, of course. That's one we get quite a lot.
Yeah.
Far right. We're going to come up with that later. But yeah, whenever you try and label someone, someone's going to take issue with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes the label will just be wrong, but also a lot of the time, it's not necessarily about right or wrong. It's about the perception of the audience member versus what we've said.
So the next one is why the UK just delayed Brexit border checks again, which was released on August 5th. Now that actually has a really high like-dislike ratio of 98.1. But I just want to say I got something wrong here. So the video...
Oh, they didn't even notice?
Yeah, no one really noticed. There was one very well-versed viewer who did point it out in the comments. But that's actually because I misread the FT article. And I implied that the border checks were all to do with goods going into the EU, but actually the checks that were suspended were about goods coming into the UK.
Okay.
And that's obviously completely different to what was described in the video. The point still sort of stands. There's still something to be said here about like the UK's preparedness for Brexit. But that's a really big mistake, and I am really sorry for that. So yeah, that was a silly one, bit of a lazy one.
Spotted by someone.
Yeah, it was spotted by someone. And then the final one to do on UK is Unpopular, Unelected. How much longer can Rishi survive?
Yeah.
Released on August 11th.
Contentious thumbnail, I imagine.
There was contentious thumbnail. I think you changed the title, didn't you? It was
the original title that was proposed and we went with originally was like it was also contentious, and I thought if the thumbnail is contentious, so I changed it pretty quickly to something slightly less spicy.
And people, again, I think the original thumb title combo, people thought it was a bit partisan, and there was a little bit of pushback there.
I think the video, again, I'm probably getting on this, I think the video itself isn't, but I completely understand that the title and thumbnail initially were, and that holds weight, of course.
Yeah, this is a classic sort of thumbnail content issue. And then other people were pushing back against the whole unelected thing, but because obviously that's just how the UK constitution works.
They're never elected in whatever. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that both of those are fair. I don't know if there's anything to like properly like apologise for, but I think those are both fair criticisms, and like that's a fair thing to say. I don't think we got anything wrong per se in the video, but it might have been like a sort of unacceptably partisan description of events.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we go to global, quickly on business, because we've been starting releasing business videos. There's a couple worth talking about, especially. I mean, I think actually a lot of them have been semi-contentious on business lately, just because of the topics we've been taking. So the video we did on why Disney is struggling, I don't know. Do you have it?
I do have it here. Yeah. So go.
The Disney struggling one. The first
Disney in
one.
trouble? No, that's 97.5.
Okay, it's not too bad. That one got some pushback because everyone in the comments was saying, no. The real reason is they're too woke. Forget your 4 reasons. It's just wokeness. So then we made a follow-up. So actually, as you say, 97.5, not actually as bad as I thought. But the comments were full of people saying, you're an idiot. They're just woke. So then we made a follow-up video that kind of compounded that anger, because the follow-up video was about whether the wokeness really is the reason, and our data suggested that it wasn't.
Yeah.
And people seeing the title and thumbnail assumed that this was going to be a right-wing video that was just backing up their points without any real info. Whereas it obviously was trying to be neutral and just actually looking at the data, and the data didn't back up that viewpoint. So I think there are a bunch of people who are upset they wasted 10 minutes on something that didn't back up their viewpoint.
Fair enough.
I think having looked through the comments, there's some minor critiques about kind of methodology and stuff, which we do address in the video. And I think there were a couple of points where we could have been clearer about how we analyze the data, because some people said you should have done it like this, and that is how we did it. I just thought it was too boring to include. So maybe next time we'll include more info about the analysis. But broadly, I think most of the critique was around the conclusion, and the conclusion was based on the data, so I can't really apologise for that.
Okay, so this is the first editorial, I think, where we've done 2 non-apologies.
I'm not apologising.
Wow.
It's your data, you did the survey. Don't be so woke.
Just wait, we're about to have a lot more non-apologies.
Okay,
God,
let me chuck over to global then. Finally, let's close with Rory.
Immediately. The tiniest bit of ego.
Yeah.
Let's close with Rory not apologising for global.
So I think the thing to say with global is, since we did our last editorial, we've been releasing globals at like a higher rate. I think that's fair to say. And I think in part because the topics that are covered on global obviously range a lot more than UK and EU. In general, the like-dislike ratio has been a bit worse than usual.
Yeah.
But I think that's in some part a symptom of the fact that we just do cover more controversial topics. You know, like when you cover Israel, you're sort of guaranteed to have a lower like-dislike, and that there are certain other topics that are a little bit like that. I think that Africa is also a topic that's a little bit like that. But I think that there are some criticisms that are fair and that we should address. So again, we're going to do it like we did with the previous ones. We're just going to go through the videos in sort of like chronological order. So from the one, the one furthest away from today.
Yeah.
And so the first one to mention is, could Niger's coup destabilise Africa? Which I think was a Rory video.
Was that the first one we did? Because that was both of us.
That was both of us. So that was released July 28th, and it has a like-dislike of 96.4, which just isn't that bad.
Yeah.
But I think there was some pushback against the idea that we treat Africa as a single homogenous entity.
Which is an issue.
Which I think is completely fair. And I think this... Look, in some part, this is just because we are trying to simplify and condense down information. But I take the general point that the media and us included do have a habit of oversimplifying when it comes to Africa. I think something similar is true, by the way, I think we're very good at this when it comes to like China, for example. You know, you forget that China is a country of 1.4 billion people, and that the average Chinese province is many times bigger than your average European country, for example. And India, again, is a similar thing. You know, you treat India as one homogenous entity or economy, and it's actually this enormous sort of like, it's essentially a continent by European standards, at least. I think actually to defend the video itself, I think while the title says something like destabilize Africa, and I think that the thumb implies something similar maybe.
The thumb only really points to the neighbouring countries, and also talks about the coup in Sahel specifically.
Okay, take that back.
So I think it's the title in particular that's the issue. I think the thumbnail clears it up a little bit, hopefully. But
so I was just about to say, good to hear that. But then also I think the content of the video actually is very specific about which countries are being affected. And we don't talk in general terms about Africa being destabilised. We are talking specifically about countries in the Sahel. So that's that. The next one is a Rory video.
Yeah.
It was the Modi losing the next Indian election, which was released August 2nd, which had a like-dislike about 88, I think,
Ooh.
something like that.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that latest figure.
No,
But,
I'm sorry.
so yeah, with that one, I think the main thing was what I would see as a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of what the video actually was.
Yeah.
A lot of the comments, well, firstly, there were some comments from people who are obviously fans of Modi, didn't
Yes.
like the fact that we even contemplated that he might lose.
Sure.
Or
Which
that
we
he
can't
could
account
lose.
for.
Yeah.
Like-
But there was also a lot of people saying, this is a terrible prediction. Obviously, he's not going to lose. He's going to win. Which I think is not a fair reflection of what the video actually says.
Yeah.
We quite clearly, the video starts and ends saying he's, all indications point to him winning re-election next year. But the idea of the video is saying, here are 3 reasons why his re-election battle might be harder than previous years.
Yes.
I understand if you look at the thumbnail, I think it says the end for Modi question mark.
It does, yeah.
But that is a classic thumbnail
We do that,
style
yeah.
we have where we're posing a question and that we hope to answer. And I think the answer is
Probably
probably
not.
not the end of Modi, but he's got a bit of a challenge.
It's harder than you might think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't a prediction. There are a couple of people referencing other videos we've made, for example, about invading Taiwan or the Turkish elections and things where they say, oh, you made these predictions in the past and got it wrong. But they were referring to those videos where we do 3 reasons why something will happen and then another one, three reasons why something won't happen.
You
And
can't just pick the one that doesn't happen and say you
yeah,
made a video
the
saying
idea is that
they're wrong.
we're presenting reasons, factors why things might or might not happen and hoping that the audience will come to their own conclusion about it. I think that was the main reason behind that one. Having
It's a
quite
very
low-
eloquent non-apology.
India is also just a contentious one generally.
I
I
was
think
about to
there's
say,
the
yeah.
baseline like-dislike for Indian content.
And
you
Pakistan,
do,
by the
and
way.
Pakistan.
Yeah.
Because both you, looking at the data, you attract a bunch of domestic people who clearly have very strong opinions, and the kind of neutral Western take doesn't always land as neutral for them, which is, I mean, fair enough.
I don't think it's necessarily about like being Western centric though. I think it's just more that domestic viewers in both those countries have really strong opinions on politics.
Yeah, of course.
Especially ones who are looking at politics videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
So you're just bound to
That's who
get
you're attracting.
people
Yeah,
who are
of
more
course.
keen on clicking like or dislike.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, so that's that one. The next one, I'm looking at the list actually. We just have 4 videos in a row that all have.
no.
I know. So the next one is 3 reasons China won't invade Taiwan, which was released again early August, 3rd of August, has 96.4.
Not dreadful.
No, not dreadful. And actually, by
Lower than
I
you'd
don't
want,
really, I
but-
don't think we should really apologise for this because. But
Go on.
there's something I wanted to address that came up in the comments quite a lot, which was that people. So we gave these 3 arguments: China won't invade Taiwan, and the first one was that the CCP have never said as much.
Yeah.
And people, entirely fair enough, said just because they don't say it doesn't mean they're not going to do it.
Sure.
But that's not an entirely fair characterisation of the argument. The argument there was, I was pointing out that when more hawkish commentators talk about Taiwan, they often seem to imply that the CCP have basically set some sort of deadline for invasion, or they overstate how bellicose Xi's rhetoric has been on the point. And the point I was making there is that actually if you listen to these American generals and they say like 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, then you actually go read what the CCP have said. The 2027 date is just sort of like a sort of interim marker on the line to this more general modernization of the People's Liberation Army, which is supposed to occur by 2035. It doesn't really say anything about invading Taiwan.
Sure.
And people treating that as a deadline or sort of inferring from that the CCP have set a deadline for invading Taiwan is just mistaken. So that one, I completely accept the gist of like you can't rule out invasion because the CCP have said it, and that's obviously correct. So, credit to people who point that out. But I think the argument was a bit weaker than that. Essentially, it was more like you can't over-infer from diplomatic statements that there's some sort of deadline. The next one is. It's gonna be a long editorial. The next one is how Niger's coup might lead to war.
Great video, 700k.
Yeah.
Great video,
Hugely
95.9.
popular.
I think again, this is a Rory video, isn't it? And I think
Yeah.
credit to you that part of the reason that this is a lower than average is just because when the video gets more views, it reaches a wider audience, and that normally translates to a lower like-dislike ratio. Before we get, I don't know if you've got any specific thoughts on this one, but before we get into that, I mean, one of the things again was that in the thumb it says could war break out in Africa.
Yes.
I mean, you actually forgot the end, so it's could war break out Africa.
Oh yeah, it still
which
is.
is fun.
That is fun.
But again, there's this sort of like stop treating Africa as a homogenous
This
block.
time though, it's very clearly zoomed in the thumbnail. It's very clear what countries we're talking about. But again, yeah.
And then there was some sort of secondary pushback about the fact that some people didn't think we put enough context in there. You can defend yourself as well, but I'm going to defend Rory here. I don't think that's entirely fair. I think the context in there was pretty good. I understand, of course, that you might have expected or wanted us to do more about the sort of colonial history of the area.
Yes.
But I think in some part this is just a function of the fact that we do like simplify news. And this problem recurs, by the way, in a later video, I think, about Africa. Yeah, why Africa hates France, which we'll get onto in a second. But we can't do a fully fledged history of Africa's colonial past in a video that's about something else and has to be like, a maximum 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
There's just not the space for it.
That video is about like quite a fast moving situation, trying to explain what was happening at the time, so it's about striking that balance.
Yeah, of course.
But,
So I think we are very sympathetic to that idea.
Yeah.
But I just think that it's sort of prohibited by the relevant constraints.
Yeah, and obviously it's a semi-self-imposed constraint, the fact that the video has to be a certain length.
Yeah.
But as Rory says, especially for topics like this, where we want to capture them quickly and get there before things change, sure, we could spend longer and make a longer video. We do it on business, we do it a fair bit. Those videos are longer. But that's because the topics on business are very rarely urgent.
Yeah.
And not every global video, say, is urgent, but a fair few of them are, and this one definitely was.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, we cannot make the video quick and more than 10 minutes. Just our workflow doesn't allow for that at the moment. Maybe it will change in the future. We are talking in the meeting we're going to have later. We're probably going to talk about longer videos and whatever. But right now we do have that constraint. And as you say, we already discussed the coup in a separate video, which provided some context. And as you say, the colonial stuff is obviously important and is touched on in other videos. But yeah, no huge space in that. Rory, do you have anything else on this one, or should we move?
I think that's all I've got on that one.
Cool.
Don't know what the next one is.
The next one is actually so the next one is, has Iran taken over Iraq?
Yeah.
Which has a like-dislike of 95.5. I think, again, it's a contentious topic involving contentious places with a contentious history. And a lot of people want us to give more context, especially about like the US invasion and all that sort of thing. But I think, that again, the same sort of thing applies. It's to do with constraints, to do with the content of our video. But I think I did make a really silly error in that video, in that I said that Iran relies on Iraq for its water supplies, when that isn't true. So the Tigris and the Euphrates actually go via Iran before the tributaries before going into Iraq. So it's rather that Iraq relies on Iran. So that is a really fucking stupid error from me. But yeah, I can only apologise for that, unfortunately.
I mean, I also almost put the arrows the wrong way around and had Iran invading Iraq. Another round, Iraq invading Iran.
Yeah.
So we almost mixed them up twice in discussion and thumbnails. So.
No, but that is that is a really it's a silly error from me, and I should apologise for that. I'm sorry. But yeah, so that's the Iran-Iraq.
Cool.
I think that's the main error there. Then we have very, very quickly, we have why more may break out between Israel and Lebanon. That has 95.3.
Oh.
There's nothing wrong with that video. I tried to look at what was wrong with that video, and actually, it's Rory's video.
Yeah.
The comments are glowing. People are just being like, "This is great." Exactly. Enormous namaste to commenters.
Yeah. There was one email I think Ben got the other day. Someone said that we should have said that Hezbollah was a terrorist organisation, and that's not something we explicitly said in the video. I could have and probably should have included that as just a sentence, but I think in my mind I treated it as something that was obvious and I shouldn't have done.
Okay.
And I kind of hoped that the description of what they do would filter through, but that's something I should have included, I think.
You also have been to Lebanon suspiciously recently.
Yes, that is true. Yeah,
you never know if you've been converted. So
that was a joke for the record. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so then the next one is why Africa and France have fallen out, which has 94.3. I actually think that we've covered the two things that were sort of like raised in the comments. One was, again, treating France as a homogenous single entity. And the second one was about like how much like colonial context.
Yes, which is also very important in this one.
Yeah, it is, but I think we do like quite a fair bit of that. And the point we're trying to make there is it's not just colonialism. Like, you know, France has these sort of like today France has these quite controversial ties to parts of Africa. It's sort of like former colonies. And what we were trying to articulate is it's just not as simple as just colonialism. I mean, colonialism plays a massive role, but it's stuff that France has continued to do today, and it's also how the West generally treats Africa versus how sort of like China and Russia treat Africa, and how the West is losing out in that sort of like great geopolitical game. So do you want to do the Argentina one? So the Argentina one is Argentina's shock presidential primary results explained, and it has like-dislike of 93.7.
Yeah, the main thing here is the label of far right that I applied to Javier Milei, who won. We kind of touched upon this, that labeling people is always a difficult thing. And for reference, this isn't why I labelled him as far right, but just for reference, like most mainstream media outlets did and do reference him as label him as far right. But that's not, you know, that you should investigate yourself and judge whether you think that label is fair. I think I consider far right to be fair for a lot of his views because they are quite far right. A lot of people were pointing out like, oh, you say he's a hardcore libertarian and he's far right, and people were saying, oh, that can't be the case. You know, they're two mutually exclusive things, which I think isn't quite fair. There's a bit of an overlap sometimes and a bit of inconsistencies in Millei's own views. For example, on abortion, he's very much not libertarian, but on other things, he's very libertarian. I mean, to give credit to Zach, he did warn that using the far right label would risk this kind of response. But I personally feel comfortable calling him far right, and I think if you watch the video and hear what we set out, things he said and his views on things, I think that does justify it. I understand people might not agree. Might have been easier just to refer to him as a, you know, kind of populist, erratic, kind of slightly wacky guy, you know, but I don't know. It's a difficult one.
Why the wacky right is on the rise, isn't it? Yeah, I agree with Rory here. I think
it goes left and right, and then there's another axis which goes wacky.
Wackiness.
I think this was a case where that label was justifiable, at least. But I do agree with the general gist that's often like articulated by the audience that far right just isn't. It's a term that's definitely overused by the media, and I agree that the main reason that I think it's overused is just because I think it's not that helpful. And I just do think that today, what you might describe as like populists or right wingers, they don't really fall so neatly into that sort of like left-right dichotomy that we've become sort of like so analytically reliant on. And I think, you know, like I was thinking about this when we did the Austria video, for example. You know, all of the mainstream media describes the Freedom Party as far right. But in lots of respects, that's true. They are traditionally right-wing. But like, for example, a lot of right-wing parties in Europe have started shifting left economically. You know, they're becoming like more pro-welfare, more pro-redistribution, that sort of thing. And so I do think that part of the issue here is that the left-right sort of divide just doesn't have as much explanatory power in today's political context as it perhaps used to. But I do think Rory's right in that if you're going to call anyone far right, he's a pretty strong contender. You know,
wacky right.
Yeah,
we'll use wacky right more going forward.
So I think that is finally. My goodness, that was a very long one. Oh, tiny one.
Oh,
no, the teensy. It's so small. You're going to love it. Is Trump's 4 major legal problems explained? I made this mistake. This was a phenomenally well-written script by the 2 US writers, so credit to them. I made a mistake when I was editing. I basically said that pilots will depend on when the trial happens, and if Trump wins, whether or not he can self-pardon. But Trump cannot self-pardon for state-level crimes.
Oh, good distinction.
You can self-pardon for, it's actually disputed, but you can maybe self-pardon for federal crimes.
Got it.
So that's the last thing.
Tiny thing.
Tiny
so
thing.
Small.
And I have to apologise.
The littlest thing.
Apologies, that's my bad.
Okay.
Wow.
Thank you both for joining us. Apologies.
The royal us, yeah.
Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in a number of weeks.
We're doing
Hopefully
2
fewer
weeks.
weeks, because this was
holiday.
This was unsustainable.
Yeah, this
we
is
can't
madness.
apologise this much in one go. My ego's fallen through the floor.
I feel so small.
So join us again in a couple of weeks when we'll be back to discuss more things we've got wrong.
Yeah, hopefully nothing.
Hopefully nothing.
Yeah.
We'll just show up and we're like,
Yeah, nothing.
nothing,
to apologise
nothing,
for.
and then walk off. It'll be a
Great.
short.
All right.